Budgeting is often portrayed as a technical phenomenon. Emphasis is given to rules, calculations and procedures which go into the formulation of a budget. The key constraints are identified. The information is assembled and analyzed for that particular time. The expectations are laid down and variances calculated and analyzed from time to time. However, the underlying organizational processes and the behavioral processes which form the context and through which pressures and demands emanate are hardly given any emphasis. The purpose of this program is to highlight the organizational and behavioral aspects which have considerable influence on the formulation and implementation of budgets. Budgets serve many purposes, often at the same time. Not only this, their role may be viewed differently by different organizational groups. Different managers of an organization may have different points of view on what is both desirable and achievable. For example, managers with a financial background will tend to highlight the supremacy of financial and economic goals. Those with a technical background will tend to emphasize the physical indicators of performance or the organization's innovative potential, whereas those with a marketing and personal management background will think differently. Debates and deliberations are an integral feature of organizational life, with various interests and perspectives coming together to constitute an organization. Would it not then be correct to say that the objectives of a budget are rarely pre-given, but they emerge from an interplay of the organization's pressures, constraints, and opportunities?
The objectives arise from the interplay of a number of forces. One of the unfortunate facts of the politics in organizations is that the objectives arise more from the play of internal forces. That is the conflicts, different points of view between the different departments of the business. For example, the marketing department would like to forecast sales with a fair degree of flexibility and perhaps commit themselves for the first 3 months but not for the remaining 9 months of the year, and give rather more general targets than specific territory-wise, product-wise mix. Similarly, the production department would make their own goals such that it gives them long production runs, minimum setup time, changes of equipment, downtime, and also those products which create less quality or other kinds of difficulties in the process of manufacture. Materials would like to have those kinds of products made where it's easier to procure raw materials or components, and finance would like those products where the margins are higher. The real force should be more based on external considerations than on internal considerations. As we are getting more competitive, this improvement is taking place. The real force in setting the objectives and goals should be what are the needs of the market, the customer, what is the competition, what are the areas in which the past performance of the company is unsatisfactory. In that process, if we look at the expectations of people outside the organization, who may be called the stakeholders in the enterprise, it is not only the shareholders who have been given attention, perhaps in the private sector in the past, or the employees and their expectations, which has been given more importance in the public sector. We should really go much more by the expectations of the ultimate consumer, the dealership distribution channel which reaches the product to the ultimate consumer, and those of the suppliers, vendors, as well as the financial institutions, the public at large. These should be the forces which determine the setting of objectives as well as goals.
Well, let me mention that generally what happens, that if there is a change in the management of the organization and the team of the executives or even the board of directors, they feel like redefining the objectives, then the initial objectives are redefined during the course of time. Sometimes it happens that because of the the demand supply situation of the product on which the corporation is or the organization is dealing, or because of the certain changes which do take place in the economic situation in the country, or because of the success or the failure of the organization, the organization goals are redefined. Now let me give an example of the organization to which I belong, the CRIPCO or Krishak Bharati Cooperative Limited. Initially, when the organization was set up in 1980, the objectives laid down was that the organization will set up the fertilizer units and grow in the same sector. However, subsequently what happened that there was a lot of change in the whole scenario. The technology changes did take place, the organization became very successful and the financial resources did grow. There was a rethinking in the top management, and therefore it was decided that why not grow in some other related areas or even unrelated areas. Therefore, the first thought that let us grow to the other fertilizer products like phosphatic fertilizers, then the chemical and petrochemical areas, and subsequently even unrelated areas. So I mean there was a lot of change which took place in the objectives of the organization. If you see over the years, you will find that the organization's objectives have been defined, modified, and have been changed. And this has taken place because of the organizational pressures, this has happened because of the constraints, and this has happened because of the opportunities which arise there.
So, whether it is due to internal pressures and constraints or due to changing external pressures and opportunities, the budgetary objectives keep on changing from one period to another. There are two implications of this. On the one hand, where the organization is working in a stable environment, hence the consequences of particular actions can be anticipated with a greater degree of certainty, the budgetary decisions would tend to be computational in character. On the other hand, if the environment of an organization is more dynamic, it is rather difficult to gauge the consequences of a particular action. The budgetary decisions in that case would tend to be judgmental. What then is the other implication?
In a dynamic situation when the objectives do change, or objectives are amended or modified, then it becomes very essential that the objectives of the budget and the whole budgeting exercise should also change accordingly. Generally what happens that in the situation where you have the new objectives or slightly different objectives than the original ones, then the whole management team and the managers have to properly communicate the new objectives, the new situation, and new environment. And therefore the whole budgeting exercise has to be adjusted accordingly. The resources have to be allocated to the new projects and new areas, and therefore I think it becomes very essential that your budgeting exercise should also be as dynamic as the objective change.
An organization is in fact a coalition of interests and concerns. A budgetary process may be characterized by competing political processes, bargaining, and debate. But to what extent are these forces a part of the budgetary exercise?
There is to some extent a friendly pressure that my project is more important than yours, why not cut yours out, mine is important, let's keep mine in.
In fact, the internal political or politicking, let us say, is rather a given factor. It's a phenomena which does exist in our environment, and therefore the bargaining and of course the debate, they form an integral part of the budget exercise. Now let me mention why does it take place. Firstly, we know that the resources at the command of the organization are limited, and all functional areas, we call them departments or we call them divisions, all of them ask for the resources because everybody thinks or perceives that probably particular function or particular area or particular department is more important. Sometimes they perceive their individual importance to the amount of the budget, the resources they get allocated to a particular activity or particular department. And therefore, what happens that internal political rivalries do play a role. Sometimes an executive who is able to get a higher allocation of the budget for the particular department, for his own department, he feels very elevated, he feels very important, that well, he is nearer to the management, he is more effective. On the other hand, a person who does get less allocation probably feels quite dejected. Therefore, I mean, this does happen naturally, but these things can be divided by proper debate. Therefore, debate forms an important part of it. You cannot eliminate it altogether, yet you can smoothen it, and you can try to minimize the damaging effect it can have on the budgetary exercise. And therefore, the bargaining which does take place should be more a bargain on looking into the objectives of the organization rather than the satisfying of individual groups or individual executives. The bargaining and the debate helps the top management in a better appreciation of the importance of various activities and various departments and various divisions. It also helps in proper understanding of the relative role of each activity by different heads of the departments. It also does help the middle level executives, because when there is a proper bargaining and debate, it does help to have the overall appreciation of the resources available with the organization and the objectives of the organization for which the budget is being formulated, and it does help in the formulation as a very effective and more achievable budget, and the exercise is much more meaningful and much more relevant and much more practical.
There is a limit to which the political process within the organization is a very legitimate part of the budgeting exercise. This is because of the tendency of each function to be more preoccupied with their own objectives, goals and problems, and not equally committed to the overall, what may be called the superordinate objectives and goals of the total enterprise. But the reality, the alternatives, choices will emerge from the interplay of the very legitimate conflicts between these functions. But a personality-based political process is not desirable. For example, the views of the marketing function should not carry more weight simply because the head of marketing is able to argue more aggressively, or even worse, the chief executive happens to come from a marketing background and therefore is relatively more biased towards the marketing function. The interplay should not come because of the past interpersonal conflicts between any two people, such as that one person succeeds to be head of the manufacturing function, another who was his rival, therefore creates various kinds of political problems in setting goals in the organization. But the initial drafts of the goals for the next year and the strategies to achieve them of each and every function should be up for questioning, debate, examination, counter suggestions by all the other functions, and an independent top management group assisted by staff functions like finance. I find in my own consulting experience, it is better to institutionalize a mechanism in which these conflicts or political processes can be legitimately handled. And this is done by organizing every year, sometime 2 to 3 months before the budget year is to begin. There is also another kind of politics. In a large diversified enterprise, there is an interdivisional competition. This is to some extent perfectly valuable, in that each division should come up with its own growth plans, need for more working capital, need for more fixed asset investment, so that the top management has the choice of allocating scarce funds between the various divisions on the most optimal lines. However, once again, the priority or preference for a particular function, division based on past experiences of anyone in the top management, or the personality pressure of any one of the divisional heads or a member of his team alone should not carry the day. The merits of the issue, especially the requirements of the market, should take precedence.
Budgeting and financial reporting affect other management practices. They establish a particular pattern of expectations which would enable delineation of management responsibility. Budgeting plays a vital role in lending visibility to the consequences of actions. Budgeting and financial practices provide the framework for regular reporting and evaluation of performance. They affect human motivation and provide the basis for rewards and sanctions.
The most serious influence is when there is no budget at all. I have seen some client organizations till about 10 years ago. More recently, such an enterprise is rare. But when they have really not even a formal budget, throughout the year it creates a considerable amount of frustration, anxiety, dependence. People have to go for case-by-case approval of each and every expenditure, not only capital, but also purchase of raw materials, pricing decisions, distribution, packaging materials, advertising. So the absence of a budget has more serious negative consequences. But that does not mean starting a budgetary system acts like a magic wand or a panacea solving all the problems. The budget itself creates certain other behavioral challenges. And these can be put broadly into two parts. There are problems in the process of formulation of the budget itself. The very call to people to think about the next year and to give the proposals creates certain kind of problems, positive and negative. And the second stage is after the budget has been formulated, its use during the year creates another set of behavioral challenges. Let's take the formulation part. People from different functions with different kind of personality dispositions respond in very strikingly different ways, and sometimes it's both funny and sad. People who have been agitating for a long time that there is no budgetary system in the organization, when they are called upon to give their proposals, have great difficulty looking at the future, coping with the uncertainties, the incomplete data before them, and they complain that budgeting is not possible. Maybe budget should be done for 6 months, or there should be a flexible budgeting, and in various ways they try to dilute the exercise. On the other hand, there are some who feel overconfident about the future and claim too much certainty for the forecasts that they make and take rigid positions in the discussions about the budget and very defensive about the initial drafts that they have produced. But this impact of budget in initially creating some anxiety is in the long run a positive thing, because it could lead to a learning curve each year, gradually making more and more accurate budgets.
Budgeting is basically the method of enforcing discipline. It gives an opportunity to the executives of an organization to learn to look after details, to observe a discipline, to be methodical.
Generally, there is a feeling that if there is a budget, then it will restrain the managers. If there is a freedom, there is lack of freedom in their actions. They do feel that if the budget can be used by the top executives, by the so-called management, to restrict their activities, to evaluate their performance, and sometimes use as a punitive action, a sort of a tool to sometimes take action on them, sometimes to punish them. In fact, it is very important that the managers and other executives in the organization should be educated about a proper role of the financial practices and the budgeting. They should be assured that budget is not an exercise and not a tool only for taking punitive action. It is also a tool to reward the efficient workers, the efficient managers, and a good performance from the people. And unless it is done, I think generally the human behavior will be that they would like to either initially avoid having a proper budget, or if at all, then they would like to ensure that either your the physical targets which you fix in the budget are too low, which are achievable, and they can achieve it and show performance. Let me give an example of my own organization again. A few years ago, when the organization went to commercial production, then the marketing activities start in different states, and in each state we had a state marketing manager, and the state was divided into various areas, and we had area managers. And there was a lot of reluctance on their part initially to formulate the budget or even participate in the budget making exercise. Obviously they thought that if they have the budget and they do participate in it, this can be used by the management to evaluate their performance, and both physical and financial. And finally, I think the management can use this as a tool to punish them. It requires some time to educate them. Our finance executives, including the director of finance and the general manager's finance and the other executives, did have a few sessions with the state marketing managers and area managers, and tried to explain to them that, well, what is the objective of the budget, how it would be useful for the organization, and how it should not be, or it would not be used for taking the punitive action against those people whose performance probably will fall short of the budgeted targets.
It must also be remembered that finance by itself can never make profits. Finance and the budget practices have to motivate the personnel in the company to perform. If finance becomes a constraint, it acts as a demotivator. It's much rather to have non-budgeting companies than have budgets which constrain the human motivation, the human excellence, and the desire to achieve the predefined goals. Therefore, those who are a part of the budgeting team and part of the finance functions must see themselves as catalysts, must see themselves as inspirators, must see themselves as motivators. To cite an example, in BHEL, in 1966, we made 8 crores of losses in 1 year. Every item of purchase has to come to finance and obtain what is known as a prior concurrence before the purchasing agency can do the purchases for the production. And when the production failed, when we asked the question, they said they have submitted a proposal to finance, and the finance has raised a number of queries. So we switched over and we said that you predefine, plan, and say that this is the money you require for this year's purchases. Once that is given, we gave them freedom to function and flexibility to perform. This alone, by the next year, resulted in seeing that the materials are available for production, and we turned round the corner. The importance of finance in motivating people should never be underestimated.
Since budgeting and financial reporting affect human motivation and provide the basis for evaluation of performance, it should be seen that the motivation for better performance is sustained. This can happen only when the group of people who are concerned with the design and implementation of budgetary control see themselves as counselors, helpers, or catalysts. With that, we conclude the first part of our program. In the second part, we shall take up some other organizational and behavioral aspects of budgeting.